I was 74 the winter my son told me to dress warmer. The furnace had coughed itself into silence sometime after sunset. I knew the sound it made when it died, like a throat trying to clear what wasn't there. I boiled a pot of water to trick the kitchen into feeling human, held my hands over the steam, and watched my knuckles bloom red where the arthritis lives. The house exhaled cold through the thin mouth of the old windows, and every breath I took came back to me in a faint white cloud, proof that I was still here. I called my son. He picked up on the second ring. "Mom, I don't have time for this," he said. "Just dress warmer. I'll call you later." There was laughter behind him, someone saying something about a meeting running long, a door opening and closing. Then a click, and I was back in my kitchen with the kettle hissing and the clock above the sink, pretending that minutes are polite things. If you'd asked me an hour before that moment how things stood between me and my boy, I would have told you the story we both like to tell, that we were fine. He visited holidays, sent pictures of the grandchildren with pumpkin guts on their hands, put his name on a Mother's Day bouquet from the grocery store. I learned to receive those gestures the way you'd receive a plate you didn't order, with a smile, a smaller appetite, and a mind counting what's missing. I opened the drawer by the sink and took out the thickest pair of socks I own, the ones with little rubber dots that hold you to the world. I put on my husband's old navy sweater, the one that never stops smelling like cedar if you're willing to close your eyes. Then I wrapped a blue throw around my shoulders because I didn't have anything warmer to put on, and for a long minute, because it had been a gift from my son when he was still the kind of boy who believed a blanket could solve most things. I flipped the light above the back door and shuffled down the steps to the basement. Above me the house moaned the way houses do when they remember their age. The furnace sat like a metal dog that didn't know it had passed long ago, pilot light out, thermostat begging in its little red script. I tapped the gauge, waited for a miracle. Tapped again. Nothing. I turned off the power, then on, then off once more, as if indecision could coax life from wires. A line of boxes hugged the cinder block wall, my husband's handwriting on most tasks, somon liniens, pichtos, Robbie Kaidi. The last label still makes me smile. He never did like the word, Caleb. Thought it sounded too biblical for a boy who insisted, at 6, that he planned to live in a tree and eat apples until he was 90. So in the photos, he's kid. In the margins of old grocery lists, he's kid. Even on the first bicycle receipt, he's kid. As if Rob could keep our boy small by naming him that way. I stood with my palm on the cold furnace and listened to the house breathe. In the quiet you can hear life arrange itself, the hum of the old fridge, the feather scratch of insulation settling in the crawl space, the distant thud of your own heart hauled up the stairs of your chest. I went back up, poured hot water into a mug, and dropped in a cinnamon stick because winter insists on its rituals. The phone sat face down on the table, screen black. When it finally lit, it wasn't my son. It was a delivery notification for a package he'd sent weeks ago. A pair of slippers, soft and expensive, the kind of thing you buy when you can afford to divide care from time. I slid the phone away and put the slippers on, because there are gifts you reject in your heart and accept at your feet. The coat rack leaned by the door. I pulled down my heaviest jacket and buttoned it to the top. The zipper paused by my throat the way grief does, surprised to find itself above skin that has already learned so much. I went out onto the back porch and pinched the thermostat wire that runs along the clapboard where the handyman had left it too long ago. Through the dark, the neighbor's porch light glowed. Mr. Alvarez, who calls me when his tomatoes take a turn and his daughter is busy. Cold snap. He said when he saw my shadow move, "You all right over there, Ms. Whittaker?" I could have said yes. I could have said no. Instead I said, the furnace finally made good on its threats. "You want me to send my nephew? He's handy. Let me try a few tricks first," I told him. Pride is a coat that doesn't always keep you warm, but you reach for it anyway. Back inside. I went to fetch the old space heater Rob had sworn we'd never use because I'd once left it on during an afternoon movie, and he'd found me sleeping under a sun of false warmth. It sat in the hall closet behind a heap of scarves we called winter snakes. When I pulled the heater out, something else slid forward with it. A stack of mail I'd tucked there in October, the day I'd decided if I moved the pile from the table to the closet it would become smaller. Paper doesn't obey that magic. I stacked the envelopes on the table. A glossy postcard for a realtor winked up at me. Smiling couple with arms linked across a lawn too green to be ours. Beneath it was something stiff, windowed, addressed to Iris Moy Ker in the block letters of bureaucracy. I could feel my name in my throat when I read it. Felt the way it takes the first part of your breath to say Iris, and the second part to say Whitaker, as if the world demands a fee for each syllable. I slit the top with a butter knife and pulled the paper free. It wasn't urgent, insurance. An update on a policy I'd almost canceled last spring. I put it aside, relieved and irritated with myself for the habit of bracing at each official stamp. The next envelope carried a logo I didn't recognize. One of those new banks with friendly fonts that talk to you like someone you'd meet in yoga. To our valued customer it began, which is a lie even when it's true. I almost tossed it, then noticed the second line, faint through the window regarding consent to transfer. Property at 412 Willow Street, my house. The name of this place that still remembers my husband's whistle and my boy's impossible footsteps. The paper shook while it was still inside the envelope. I set it down like something that could bite and told myself later. Later is a lullaby people sing to panic. I turned the heater on. It stuttered like an old man telling a joke he doesn't remember the punchline to, then found its voice. The air warmed in a circle no bigger than the worry on my lap. The phone stayed quiet. I held it anyway, thumb tracing the small crack near the bottom where I'd dropped it last month, the scar you learn to ignore until the light hits it right. At 8:41 p.m., my son's name lit the screen. Caleb. Hey, he said, not unkindly. Not kindly. Hey, I answered. There's a way a mother says that word. Hey, that is a question, an apology, and a record of ownership all at the same time. Still cold. Yes, I said, but manageable. Good. I've got a conference call. Tomorrow I can swing by and look at the thermostat. You don't have to. It's no big deal. It's yours. I said before I knew I was saying it. His silence asked what I meant. The thermostat, I added. It's your kind of problem. Numbers. Wires. I always make them worse. He laughed once, a pocket laugh. Mom, everything is your kind of problem. You just like the ones that can't be fixed. Sometimes the people you raised build small altars to their own meanness, and then pretend they're just making conversation. I swallowed. I don't think heat is one of those. Dress warmer, he said again, more gently this time, as if putting a kindness on the same word makes it a new word. I'll call you in the morning. He hung up before I could say his name. I sat with the sound the call left in its place, a kind of vacuum you can feel in the bones below your ear. On the mantel, the old clock coughed a quarter hour it had been saving. I looked at the framed photograph beside it. A boy with a bowl haircut and 2 front teeth missing, his hands in the air like life had just scored a point. When he was 5, that boy once took my face in his hands, looked very seriously into my eyes, and said, "You're my whole house, Mommy." I wrote it down on a recipe card and tucked it into the cake book, because I was afraid memory would handle it too roughly if I left it wandering. I still have the card. It shows up when I need flour. The heater hummed. I pulled the blanket tighter and watched shadows fall into each other across the living room rug. Outside, somewhere near the corner, an icicle detached with the patience of a monk and broke against the porch rail. I was the only person who heard it happen, and I felt suddenly protective, the way you do when a small thing dies correctly and no one witnesses it. On the coffee table, The consent to transfer envelope weighted the way a new word waits on your tongue. I slid the paper out. Read it once to understand the grammar, twice to understand the intent. It wasn't a demand. It was an information letter about a pending change in service tied to a prospective property financing. I read the lines that promised nothing had been finalized, that the notice was routine, that no action was required. But there are sentences that are a kind of music, and I have learned to hear the note that means pay attention. The sender's name was Small M. Carver. The address line used my full name, Iris L. Wattaker. I have gone most of my life with the L politely quiet between first and last. Seeing it spoken by a stranger made me sit up straighter, like a nurse you don't know calling you by a nickname only family uses. I reached for my pen, the heavy one I use for checks. I wrote call in the morning across the top of the page, because naming an errand can make it less like a cliff. The pen made the sound I love, the whisper, scratch of ink admitting it's permanent. I wish all the important things in my life had confessed themselves that way. At 9:30, the power flickered. The heater hiccuped, caught, then continued. I turned off the lamps one by one, left the kitchen light on because the house prefers a nightlight when it's ill. I brushed my teeth to the thought that had been circling the ceiling all evening, finally landing. He told me to dress warmer. There are instructions that are really erasures. Dress warmer is what you tell a person you plan not to see. Dress warmer is what you tell the problem when you've chosen the life on the other side of it. Dress warmer says, I have done the math and you are not in it. I am not a dramatic woman. I have lived a long, untelevised life of receipts and casseroles and the sturdy economy of making do. But there over the sink with the water running on my toothbrush, I met the sentence that would separate the before from the after. If I am invisible as a mother, I will become undeniable as something else. I looked through the kitchen window at the dark square of my backyard. The fence Rob and I built higher than the code allowed because he wanted privacy enough to sing bad Sinatra without punishment. I looked at the outline of the maple where Caleb the kid had learned the truth about gravity in steps and stitches. I looked at the roofline, at the stubborn angle where the gutter always forgets to do its job until the third reminder. And I said my house out loud, to see if the saying of it changed the shape of it in my mouth. 412 Willow. I have always believed a house listens. On the table, under the heater's small buzz and the clock's pep talk, lay a letter I would call in the morning about, a photograph of a boy with air for hands, and a phone that, for the first time all winter, did not feel like a living thing. I put the pen beside the paper, squared their corners the way people do when they are ready to behave like owners, and slid the slippers off because my feet had warmed, because I could. When I turned out the last light, the living room fell into a soft dark that felt more like a held breath than a void. I did not pray. I did not curse. I just stood there a moment longer than usual, letting the house and I acquaint ourselves with what comes next. In the morning, I would make a call, and I would say my name first. The morning after the furnace died, I boiled coffee in the old percolator. The taste was bitterer than I remembered, but that might have been the night still clinging to my tongue. The heater hummed bravely at my feet, its circle of warmth like a coin you can't spend anywhere else. I called the number on the letter. After 3 minutes of robotic voices and hold music that sounded like melted plastic, a man came on the line. His name was David, or maybe Daniel. The phone hissed like it didn't want me to know. Yes, Mrs. Whittaker, he said after pulling up my file. That's a routine consent form. Nothing binding yet, just part of an evaluation. It appears there's been an application to refinance the property. Application by who? I asked. Silence. The kind that isn't confusion but policy. Finally, I can't disclose names, Mayam. But I can say the application listed a family connection. My hand tightened around the phone. Family connection. Those are words that cut when you didn't hand them the knife. For the next week, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a mistake, a wrong address, some administrative hiccup in a system too big to know who owns what. But denial is only a quilt. Eventually it slips off and the cold finds you. Caleb didn't call again. A text on Thursday, sorry, busy week. We'll check in soon. The word soon is a coat with no buttons. It covers nothing. When I finally saw him, it was by accident. I had gone to the grocery store on Saturday, bundled in my thick coat, pushing the cart with a list short enough for one bag. He was there in the produce section, laughing with his wife, Lisa. They were debating avocados, pressing the skins with their thumbs. I waved. He didn't notice at first. Then he did, and the smile dropped from his face like fruit bruising. "Mom," he said, walking over. "You should have told me you were out today." "I didn't know I needed permission to buy bread," I said. Lisa stayed by the avocados, pretending she was still interested, though I could see her ears listening. "How's the heat?" he asked. "Still broken." "The heater does what it can. I told you I'd swing by. You told me to dress warmer." The words slipped out before I could tuck them back. His jaw tightened. He looked over his shoulder at Lisa, then leaned in, lowering his voice. "Not here, Mom. Please. I wanted to ask, not here what? Not here speak like family. Not here reveal the cracks you built yourself." But the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't shame. It was inconvenience. That night, after putting away the groceries, I sat with the letter again. I traced the name of my street, the way a widow traces a wedding band she can't bring herself to remove. The house had been mine and Rob's before it was anyone else's. We picked the lot because of the maple out back, the one with roots like stubborn veins. I remembered the day we moved in. Caleb was 10, already restless, already taller than I wanted him to be. He ran through every empty room shouting, "Mine! Mine!" And I laughed until I cried. Rob put his arm around me and whispered, "This is the house that will hold us." And it had. It held birthdays and thunderstorms, arguments and reconciliations, my health and my first winter alone. It had listened to every silence. On Tuesday, the phone rang. Not Caleb. "Lisa. Hi." "Iris," she said, her voice bright with the sweetness people pour over something bitter. "I just wanted to check if you're comfortable. Caleb's been swamped, you know. We've got a lot going on." "I'm managing," I said. "That's good. You know, it might be easier for everyone if you thought about downsizing. Smaller place, less upkeep, a condo maybe." "Caleb worries about you here by yourself?" "Does he?" "Of course. He just doesn't always say it right. You know how men are." I almost laughed. Caleb used to say everything right when he was 5 and thought I was a house. Now every word from him felt rented, like he'd borrowed them from someone else. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, and hung up before she could lace the thought with more sugar. That night, as I turned off the heater and went to bed, I whispered into the dark, "If they want me out, they'll have to carry me." The house creaked in reply, the way old bones do when they agree. But somewhere deeper, under the comfort of that defiance, another voice whispered back, "What if they already planned to?" And that was the first time I realized I might not just be unwanted. I might be in their way. The phone calls stopped after Lisa's polite little warning. "No. How are you, Mom?" "No. We'll drop by Sunday." Silence can be a crueler answer than any word, because you're forced to fill it yourself. I filled it with chores. Scrubbing the stove atop until my back ached, rearranging the pantry like soldiers in perfect rows, folding laundry that didn't need folding. An old woman's rituals, I suppose, but I needed to hear proof that my hands still mattered. That Friday evening, I made soup, potato and leek, Rob's favorite. I was ladling a bowl when I heard tires in the driveway. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe Caleb had remembered. Maybe guilt had finally caught up. But it wasn't a visit. It was a meeting. Their voices drifted up through the kitchen window left ajar to let the steam out. Lisa's sharper, Caleb's low and tired. I froze with the ladle in my hand. Every nerve straining. "She's stubborn," Lisa said. "But the papers are almost ready. Once she's moved out, The transfer goes through. She's not ready, Caleb muttered. She thinks this place is her whole life. Well, it can't be. It's our future now. That equity. That's what gets us the new house. That's college for the kids. Why should she hoard it when she barely uses half the rooms? There was a pause. I could hear the sound of Caleb dragging his shoes on the gravel. An old habit when he didn't want to answer. She'll be devastated, he said finally. She'll survive, Lisa snapped. We can't keep waiting for her to. We need to live now. The soup ladle slipped from my hand, clattering into the pot. They didn't hear it. I pressed myself against the counter, breath shallow, like the walls themselves might betray that I was listening. I wanted to storm outside, to shout Caleb's name the way I used to when he stayed out past curfew. But my body wouldn't move. I just stood there, shaking. Soup cooling on the stove while my son and his wife planned my exile 10 feet from the window. When their voices faded, the car doors slammed, and the engine coughed to life. I finally let myself breathe. My hands found the counter edge, holding me up. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps coming to drag me out. Every gust of wind through the maple sounded like the whisper of signatures I hadn't made. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at that letter, the words consent to transfer echoing louder than any lullaby. At sunrise, I poured myself cold coffee and whispered, "They want me gone." And the house, faithful old thing, groaned back as if to say, "Then fight, Iris. Fight." The morning after their conversation, I couldn't bring myself to touch the soup pot. It sat on the stove, lid crooked, potatoes swollen and gray in their own silence. I threw the whole thing out, the way you throw out a memory that soars faster than you expected. I dressed in Rob's old sweater again, the navy one that still smelled faintly of cedar. When you're about to do something brave, it helps to borrow the weight of someone who once believed you could. By noon, I was sitting in a law office downtown. My hands folded around a folder of old deeds and tax bills. The receptionist had looked at me with that mixture of politeness and impatience reserved for the elderly. But when the door opened and a young man in a neat suit appeared, his expression wasn't impatience at all. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Daniel Ruiz. Please come in." His office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. There were no heavy leather chairs, no intimidating diplomas in golden frames, just a desk, 2 modest chairs, and a plant reaching for the light. I sat heart-knocking against my ribs. "I don't know where to begin," I confessed. "But I think my son is trying to take my house." He didn't flinch, didn't laugh, just leaned forward. "Tell me everything." And so I did. The cold night. The phone call, Lisa's suggestion about downsizing, the letter with the word transfer, and finally, the voices I overheard in my driveway. My throat ached by the time I finished. But Daniel only nodded, his pen scratching steadily across a yellow pad. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said, "first, I want you to understand. You still hold full legal ownership of your home. No one can transfer, refinance, or sell it without your explicit consent. What you overheard suggests they're trying to position themselves, maybe even forge cooperation you never gave. That's serious." The word serious settled in my chest like an anchor. "What do?" I asked. "You fight back, quietly at first. We'll put a freeze on any property filings. I'll file a notice with the county clerk tomorrow morning. That way, no transaction involving 4012 Willow can proceed without your direct approval." I felt my eyes sting. "So I'm not powerless." Daniel smiled gently. "Not even close. People forget age doesn't erase rights. It just makes them think you won't use them." On the bus ride home, I stared out the window at the street sliding by. Every tree, every cracked sidewalk seemed sharper, more precious. I thought about Caleb as a boy, how he once insisted on carrying the groceries though the bags were too heavy. How he would look back at me with that stubborn grin, as if daring me to admit he was strong enough. Somewhere along the years, He had stopped looking back. When I stepped off at Willow Street, the wind cut sharp, but it didn't sting as much. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt a spine straightening inside me. I unlocked the door, set the papers on the kitchen table, and said out loud, to no one but the house, "If they want a war, they've chosen the wrong old woman." And for once, the silence felt like agreement. It was Lisa's idea to call a family meeting. She said it like we were still the kind of family that ate Sunday roast together, not the kind that sent letters with words like transfer. They came on a Saturday afternoon, the air sharp with March wind. Caleb carried a store, bought cake in one hand, Lisa ushering the children in with the other. She made it look like a visit, but I could smell strategy the way you smell bleach. It clings even when you're trying to mask it with sugar. We sat around my dining table. The cake sat unopened in its box, a prop no one touched. Lisa began, her smile polished. "Iris, we've been talking. You know this house is too much for you. It isn't safe stairs, the yard, the upkeep. We're just worried. Downsizing would make life easier for everyone." "Everyone?" I asked. She hesitated, then pressed on. "Yes, you'd be comfortable. And we could manage things more efficiently." The children fidgeted, sensing tension they couldn't name. Caleb cleared his throat. "Mom, Lisa's right. We're only thinking of your future." I looked at him, my boy who once called me his whole house. His face was careful now, the kind of careful that hides guilt under duty. "My future," I said slowly, "isn't yours to rearrange." Silence pressed in, broken only by the ticking of the clock above the mantel. Then Lisa leaned forward, voice tight. "This place has value, Iris. Real value. It could set the family up for years. Surely you don't mean to cling to empty rooms while we struggle." The words landed like stones. Cling, empty. As if my life here was nothing but clutter in their way. Before I could answer, a knock at the door startled us all. Daniel Roos stepped in, his suit still crisp despite the wind. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said warmly, then turned to the others. "I'm her attorney. I thought it best to stop by in person." Lisa's smile faltered. Caleb shifted in his chair. Daniel set a folder on the table, opening it with deliberate calm. "I want to be clear. This home belongs entirely to Mrs. Whittaker. Any attempt to refinance, transfer, or sell without her consent has already been blocked at the county level. Legally speaking, your plans cannot proceed." The room cracked with silence. Lisa's face flushed, anger spilling through her smile. Caleb's shoulders slumped, the fight leaving him like air escaping a balloon. I sat straighter than I had in years. For once, it wasn't my voice shaking the room. Daniel closed the folder. "Mrs. Whittaker has chosen to remain in her home. That is final." The children were the first to move, slipping down from their chairs and wandering toward the living room, unaware they had just witnessed their parents lose something bigger than a house. Lisa gathered her purse, lips tight. "We'll talk later," she muttered to Caleb. When the door finally closed behind them, the house exhaled. Daniel gave me a small nod. "You did the right thing, Mrs. Whittaker. Don't let them convince you otherwise." When he left, I sat alone at the table, staring at the unopened cake. The icing flowers looked plastic under the kitchen light. I slid it into the trash without tasting it. Because sometimes, the sweetest things are poisoned before they ever reach your tongue. That night, the house felt heavier than usual, as if it too had heard the lies spoken under its roof and was sagging under their weight. I brewed chamomile tea, but even that tasted bitter on my tongue. I sat in the armchair by the window with the old photo album. The leather cover was cracked, the pages soft from years of turning. I hadn't opened it in months, maybe years. The first page held Caleb as a baby, wrapped in a quilt I'd stitched from Rob's old shirts. His face was round, eyes curious, as if he already suspected the world might break him and wanted to memorize me before it did. Another page, Caleb at 6, holding a kite Rob helped him build. He had his father's grin then, wide and impossible. I remembered how he'd run across the yard yelling, "Mom, look at me! I'm flying it higher than the sky." I turned another page and my throat closed. Caleb, 12, leaning against the maple tree, one arm slung around my shoulders. Rob had taken the picture. "Smile," he'd said. Caleb had whispered, "You're my favorite person in the whole house, Mom." Right before the click of the camera, I shut the album. The memories felt like someone else's life. Later that week, Mrs. Alvarez from next door stopped me at the mailbox. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. "Iris," she said, "I shouldn't meddle, but I overheard something the other day. Lisa was at the pharmacy talking on the phone," she said, "and I swear I'm not making this up. She said once your house was in their hands, she'd finally feel like everything was hers. Not yours. Not even Caleb's. Hers." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd wanted to believe Caleb was the one pushing me out, because then the betrayal would be simple, son against mother. But hearing it was Lisa, pulling the strings with greed sharp as glass, twisted the knife in a new way. Mrs. Alvarez touched my arm gently. "You've always been kind. Don't let them take what's yours." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, memories mixing with Mrs. Alvarez's warning. Had Caleb always been weak, or had Lisa simply carved the strength out of him piece by piece? I thought of all the years I'd spent protecting him, sacrificing for him. I remembered walking in the snow with soaked shoes just to get him to piano lessons, skipping meals so he could have seconds at dinner, working extra shifts so he'd never know the word scarcity. And now, my boy, my kid, had become a man who would trade his mother's home for his wife's approval. I turned to the wall, pressing my palm against the cool plaster. "Rob," I whispered into the dark. I kept him alive. I gave him everything. And still, it wasn't enough. The house creaked in answer, old bones shifting as if it grieved with me. When I finally drifted into sleep, my dream was sharp and strange. Caleb was small again, calling me from the maple tree, "Mom, look at me." But when I turned, it wasn't a kite he held. It was the deed to the house. And Lisa's hand was wrapped tight around his. I woke with a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold. Because sometimes dreams don't lie. They only say aloud what you already know. The knock came on a gray morning, when the sky looked bruised, and the maple dripped from an overnight rain. I opened the door to find Caleb and Lisa standing there, their children fidgeting in the car. Caleb's hands were stuffed deep in his coat pockets. Lisa's smile was tight as wire. "Mom," Caleb began, "we've been talking. This isn't working. You're alone here, the house is too much. It's not safe." Lisa stepped forward, her voice sharper. "We've arranged a room at Rosewood Living. It's a lovely place, Iris. Meals, nurses, company. You'll be comfortable. And we can handle everything here." I gripped the doorframe, the wood solid under my palm. "Rosewood," I repeated, tasting the word like spoiled fruit. "That's a nursing home. A retirement community," Lisa corrected quickly. Caleb avoided my eyes. "It's for the best. We're just trying to take care of you." I laughed then. Not a kind laugh, but the brittle sound of something snapping. "Take care of me." By stealing my home. Lisa's smile vanished. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. We're only thinking of the future." "My future is not your property," I said, voice steady now. I stepped back into the hallway and reached for the folder Daniel had given me. I pulled out the signed papers, copies of the freeze order, the notice lodged at the county clerk's office. I held them up between us like a shield. "This house," I said, "is legally untouchable without me, and I am not moving. Not now. Not ever. You will not put me away to make your lives easier." For a moment, neither spoke. Caleb's face flushed with something, shame or anger, I couldn't tell. Lisa's lips thinned, her eyes dark with fury. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "No," I said quietly. "You will." They left without another word. The car engine roared, the children's voices muffled in the back seat. When the sound faded, the house seemed to sigh with me, as though its walls had been bracing for the fight too. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. My knees shook, But inside, something steadier than bone held me upright. For the first time, I knew they would stop at nothing. But neither would I. If they wanted war, it had already begun. The silence after their departure stretched for days. Caleb didn't call. Lisa didn't text. Even the children, who sometimes left drawings in my mailbox, stayed away. It was as if my refusal had turned me into a ghost they no longer had to see. But ghosts haunt. On the third day, Mrs. Alvarez stopped by with a basket of rolls still warm from her oven. She sat at my kitchen table and shook her head. "I saw Lisa in town," she said softly. She was furious. "Told someone at the pharmacy you were being selfish, that you'd rather rot alone than give your family a chance to thrive." Selfish. I repeated, the word sour. All those years of double shifts, missed meals, birthday parties paid for with nickels and dimes. Selfish had never once lived in me. Mrs. Alvarez squeezed my hand. "Don't let her poison your heart. Some people only see what they can take." That evening, my phone rang. Caleb's name lit the screen. My chest tightened as I answered. His voice was wary, clipped. "Why are you doing this? Lisa's right. You can't stay in that house forever. It's not fair to us." "Fair?" I asked, heat rising in my throat. "Do you know what wasn't fair, Caleb? Watching your father die and still showing up to every school meeting so you'd never feel abandoned. Skipping meals so you could eat. Working holidays while you opened gifts. That wasn't fair. But I did it because you were my son." He was quiet. For a moment, I thought I'd broken through. Then he muttered, almost under his breath, "Lisa says you'll never understand." "Lisa," I snapped, "is not the one who raised you. I am." He inhaled sharply, and then the line went dead. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the lamp throwing soft shadows across the rug. I thought about how a house can be loud even in silence, how every creak, every sigh of the wood is a reminder that it has lived through storms before. And so had I still. Beneath the defiance, there was grief. Not just for what they were trying to take, but for what I had already lost. The boy who once called me his whole house, now reduced to a man who couldn't hear my voice over his wife's. I closed my eyes and whispered to the walls. They may have his ears, but I still have the truth. The maple outside bent in the wind, its branches tapping gently against the window as if to agree. Sunday morning, I pulled down the old boxes from the attic. Not because I needed anything, but because I needed to do something. The silence of the house had grown too sharp, like a knife pressed to my ear. The first box was full of linens that smelled faintly of cedar. The second, a jumble of Caleb's childhood toys, a stuffed bear missing an eye. A wooden car Rob had carved, school papers yellowed at the edges. The third box nearly split under its own weight. Tax files, mortgage papers, insurance policies. Rob had kept every scrap. I sneezed as dust spiraled into the light, then began sorting, one brittle page at a time. At the very bottom, beneath a stack of old receipts, I found a smaller envelope. Rob's handwriting on the front stopped me cold for Iris. "If you ever need it." My hands trembled as I slid it open. Inside was a folded letter, dated the year before he died. "My Iris, if you're reading this, I'm not there to remind you what you already know. This house is more than lumber and brick. It's the spine of everything we built. One day, someone may try to convince you it's just property, just money. Don't let them. This home holds the echoes of every laugh, every fight, every step our boy took. It's yours to keep until the day you choose to let it go. Not a moment sooner. And because I know you, because I know you'll always fear being a burden, I want you to feel secure. I've left a small account in your name, separate from everything else. Enough to keep you steady if the world turns against you. The details are in the bank file labeled Linneans. I trust you'll find it when you need it most. I love you. I trust you. Stay strong." Rob tears blurred the ink. I pressed the letter to my chest, as if I could feel the rhythm of Rob's heart through the faded paper. So he had known. He had seen the possibility of betrayal before I ever imagined it. and he had armed me with both truth and means. I rummaged back into the box of linens and found the folder marked linens, exactly where he said. Inside was a bank statement. Years old but still bearing my name on a modest account I'd never known existed. Enough money to stand on my own. Enough to prove I was not helpless. That evening, I lit a single candle on the mantel. Not for prayer. I'd never been good at those, but for remembrance. The flame flickered across the photo of Rob, his grin wide. Eyes shining with a secret I now finally understood. They think they can erase me. I whispered. But you knew better. And so do I. The candlelight danced as if he was nodding. It was a week after I found Rob's letter when the knock came again. This time, no polished smile. No sharp-tongued wife. Just Caleb, alone on the porch. He looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe it was just the weight of failure bending his shoulders. His coat was unzipped, hair unkempt, eyes hollow like he hadn't slept. "Mom," he said softly. I didn't answer at first. I let him stand there in the cold, shifting from foot to foot, before finally opening the door wider. "Come in," I said, though my voice held none of the warmth it once did. He sat at the kitchen table where so many of our battles had begun. His hands were clasped tight, knuckles white. "Lisa left," he said after a long silence. "She took the kids to her sister's. She said I was useless if I couldn't secure the house. She said," his voice cracked. "She said I wasn't even a man." I stared at him, at the boy who once ran barefoot through this very kitchen, chasing bubbles Rob blew from the sink. Now all I saw was a man hollowed out by greed and someone else's hunger. "Why are you here, Caleb?" I asked. He lifted his eyes to mine, and for the first time in months, I saw something that looked like regret. "I'm sorry, Mom. I was stupid. Weak. I thought I was doing right by my family, but all I did was betray the one person who ever stood by me. Please forgive me. I don't want the house anymore. I just want things back the way they were." The words should have healed me. Once, they would have. But now they rang hollow, like apologies whispered too late at a graveside. I thought of Rob's letter hidden upstairs, of the secret account that could keep me safe no matter what storm Caleb dragged to my door. I thought of the voice Lisa had sharpened inside his head until he couldn't tell where hers ended and his began. "I don't know if things can go back," I said quietly. "Some things, Caleb, once broken, don't mend. Not the way they were." His face crumpled, but I didn't move to comfort him. My hands stayed folded in my lap. "You're still my son," I added after a pause. "But you chose someone else's voice over mine. You chose greed over love. And forgiveness." I shook my head. "Forgiveness isn't a switch I can flip for you." He nodded slowly, eyes shining with unshed tears. "I understand," he whispered, though I wasn't sure he did. When he left, I watched from the window as he walked down the street, his figure shrinking into the gray distance. I closed the curtains, locked the door, and whispered into the stillness. I may still be his mother, but I am no longer his home. 2 weeks passed. I began to believe Caleb's apology, thin as it was, might be the end of it. The days softened. I cleaned the attic, baked bread, even sat by the maple tree with a blanket across my knees. Then, one Tuesday morning, a sharp knock rattled the door. When I opened it, a man in a gray suit handed me a stack of papers. "Mrs. Whittaker?" he asked. "Yes, you've been served." He left before I could speak. I looked down at the pages, my name stamped in black ink beside Caleb's. Petition for partition of property. My son, my only son, was suing me for my own home. I carried the papers to the kitchen table and sat, heart pounding. Every line blurred, but the meaning was clear. Caleb claimed I was unfit to maintain the property, that for the benefit of the family. The house should be sold and proceeds divided. Lisa's voice lingered in every sentence, even if her name never appeared. I laughed then, a hollow sound that startled me. The boy who once called me his whole house now wanted to dismantle it brick by brick. That afternoon, I called Daniel. He listened without interruption, then said firmly, "Well, fight this," He doesn't have a leg to stand on. The court respects clear ownership, especially with your documentation. Whittaker, don't let their cruelty convince you you're weak. You have more power than you think. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Thank you, Daniel. Not just for the law, for believing me. You're not the first parent to face betrayal, he said gently. But you'll be one of the few who refuses to bow to it. The weeks that followed blurred into preparation. Court dates set, statements filed. Neighbors whispered. The scandal spreading down Willow Street. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration. At night, I read Rob's letter again and again, his words steadying me like a hand at my back. The secret account, untouched, became less about survival and more about purpose. I began to dream, not just of keeping my house, but of building something bigger, something no court could take away. On the morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't just a widow or a mother. She was the defender of a lifetime, the keeper of memory, the last witness to a promise made long ago. I tied my scarf, straightened my coat, and whispered to the reflection, "They want to take my house. Instead, I will take back my voice." And for the first time in years, I felt ready for battle. The courthouse smelled of paper and polish, that strange mix of bureaucracy and judgment. I walked in on Daniel's arm. My scarf knotted tight at my throat like armor. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected. 4 rows of benches, pale wood panels. The state flag hanging limply in the corner. Yet it felt cavernous, as if every memory of betrayal had gathered to sit in judgment too. Caleb was already there. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Lisa sat beside him despite her promises of leaving, lips pressed in a thin, triumphant line. I thought of the nights she had stood in my kitchen, pretending to smile at me while already plotting my erasure. When the judge entered, we all rose. My knees ached, but I stood taller than I had in years. Caleb's lawyer began. He spoke of concern, of safety, of family responsibility. He painted me as fragile, incapable, a woman too old to maintain a house that should serve the next generation. Each word twisted my stomach tighter, but I stayed still, letting him think silence was surrender. Then it was Daniel's turn. He rose calmly, his voice steady as stone. "Your Honor, Mrs. Whittaker is the sole legal owner of 41 Two Willow. She has paid every tax, maintained every record, and continues to live there safely. There is no evidence she is unfit. What there is," he held up a folder, "is evidence of coercion. Documents showing attempts to refinance without her consent. Testimony from neighbors who overheard conversations of removal. This is not concern. This is greed." A ripple moved through the room. Lisa stiffened, Caleb's jaw clenched. When the judge asked if I wished to speak, I rose. My hands trembled, but my voice did not. "This house," I said, "is not just walls. It is where I raised my son, where my husband breathed his last, where every sacrifice I ever made was built into the floors. My son thinks selling it will secure his future. But the truth is, by trying to take it from me, he's already lost something he'll never get back." The silence afterward was heavier than any gavel. Even the judge seemed to pause before nodding. The ruling came swift. The petition dismissed. Ownership remained mine unchallenged. The court recognized the attempt as unfounded, even malicious. I heard Lisa's sharp breath, Caleb's low groan. But I did not look at them. I kept my eyes on the flag, on the ceiling, on anything that wasn't the face of the boy who had dragged me here. When the gavel struck, Daniel touched my shoulder gently. "You've won, Mrs. Whittaker." "No." I thought, gathering my coat. "I survived." Outside, the air was crisp, sunlight breaking through gray clouds. Neighbors who had come to watch offered nods, small smiles. Some even clapped softly, like the end of a quiet play. I walked down the courthouse steps slower than I used to, but with each step, I felt the weight lifting. Not because justice had restored me, but because I had restored myself. The house was waiting, and for the first time, I knew it would never again be just a house. It was my victory, my proof, my home. 3 days after the court ruling, the doorbell rang again. I knew that rhythm. It was Caleb. Short, nervous presses, the way he used to ring after sneaking home late as a teenager. I opened the door. He stood there, hat in his hands, his face gray with shame. "Mom," he whispered. I didn't answer. I let the silence do the work. "I'm sorry," he said again, stepping inside without waiting for my invitation. His eyes darted around the house like a thief returning to the scene of his own crime. I shouldn't have taken it that far. "Lisa," she pushed me, but it was me who signed the papers. "I know I've hurt you." He sank into the kitchen chair, the same spot where he used to do homework while I made dinner. Now he looked like a stranger occupying my son's skin. "I lost everything," he continued. "Liz is gone for good. The kids barely speak to me. And you're all I've got left. Please, Mom, can we start over?" For a moment, the mother in me wavered. I saw flashes of the boy who once clutched my hand crossing streets, who once whispered, "You're my whole house." But then I remembered the courtroom. The petition with my name dragged through it like mud. The way he had tried to make me small for his gain. "You came here for forgiveness," I said softly. "But forgiveness doesn't erase choices. You made yours." His lips trembled. "So that's it? You'll just turn your back on me?" "No," I said, standing straighter than I felt. "I'll always be your mother. But being a mother doesn't mean letting my child destroy me. Love without respect isn't love. It's chains. And I've lived long enough to know I won't wear them." He stared at me, eyes wet. For once, he had no argument left. Slowly, he rose, nodded, and walked to the door. At the threshold, he hesitated. "I'll regret this for the rest of my life," he murmured. "You should," I replied. And then he was gone. That night, I lit Rob's candle again. His letter lay on the table, its words etched into my bones. I whispered to the flame, "It's done, Rob." He made his choice. Now I'll make mine. The account he'd hidden from me was still there waiting. And suddenly I knew exactly what to do with it. Not for Caleb, not for Lisa, not even for myself, but for the ones like me, left behind, overlooked, nearly erased. If my own blood had forgotten me, then I would make sure no one else's mother, no one else's neighbor, would ever be forgotten again. The morning after Caleb's last visit, I went to the bank with Rob's letter in my purse. The teller looked at me curiously when I handed over the account number. After a few keystrokes, she nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Whitaker, it's active. Would you like to withdraw?" I shook my head. "Not withdraw. Redirect." Within a week, with Daniel's help, the paperwork was complete. A modest fund, nothing flashy, nothing grand, was born under the name the Willow Foundation, in honor of the tree that had watched my boy grow and my marriage endure. Its purpose was simple: to help elderly neighbors who had no one to fight for them. A new furnace, a legal consultation, a week of groceries, whatever kept dignity intact. The first time I delivered a check, it was to Mrs. Alvarez's cousin, a widow whose roof leaked so badly rainwater pooled in her pans. She wept as if I'd handed her the world. I told her gently, "It's not charity. It's a reminder that you matter." Word spread. Slowly, people stopped looking at me with pity and started looking at me with respect. Not because I'd kept a house, but because I'd turned my fight into something larger. One evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the maple branches whispering above. The house glowed softly behind me, windows lit like watchful eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was clinging to it. I felt like we were standing together. I thought of Caleb then, not with anger, not even with grief, but with a kind of sorrowful acceptance. He had chosen his path, I had chosen mine, and mine led here to resistance, to resilience, to a promise that blood may betray you, but love, real love, can be planted anywhere and still grow. When neighbors asked how I found the strength, I always said the same: sometimes survival is not enough. Sometimes you have to turn survival into defiance, and defiance into love. The Willow Foundation was small. It would never change the whole world, but it changed mine, and in quiet ways, it began to change the lives around me. On the last page of Rob's letter, I wrote my own words. In my own hand, if they try to erase you, write yourself deeper. If they try to silence you, speak louder. And if they try to take your home, become your own foundation. Then I placed the letter back in its envelope, set it in the drawer, and blew out the candle on the mantel. The house exhaled with me, and for the first time in a long time, it felt not like a shelter I was clinging to, but a beacon I was finally lighting. In the end, Iris did not win by keeping her house. She won by refusing to be erased. Her story reminds us that family is not defined by blood, but by those who choose to honor and protect us. If you've ever felt discarded or overlooked, remember, you are not powerless. You have a voice, and sometimes the greatest act of love is to stand firm in your worth. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Leave a comment, tell us your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that prove resilience and love can outlast betrayal. Because no one deserves to be forgotten.